Hey everyone, welcome to the first of what I have been calling the fall science fiction fantasy debut panel, but like the first of the fall portion because I feel like now that it is officially September, it's officially like fall season, no matter what the weather around me or around anyone else says. So, welcome to fall and welcome to the fall portion of this year's panels. I'm so excited to be joined by all of these debut authors. Just a little bit about me. My name is Lily, and I am the book human, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind everywhere on the internet. And just also a quick notice before I let the authors introduce themselves and talk about their books. I just wanted to remind everyone that in our panel space, we do not tolerate any harassment of any kind. Our goal is to create like a safe panel space. And so just know that if we find you engaging in any harassment or hate speech, we will be removed and blocked from our chat. So I'm happy to now have the authors introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their books.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanvi Berwa and I'm the author of Monsters Born and Made, which is about a 16-year-old girl who's a sea monster hunter, and she cheats her way into a chariot race tournament and causes all sorts of shenanigans on her island.
Hi, my name's Ashlyn Brophy, and I'm the author of the YA contemporary fantasy book, How to Succeed in Witchcraft. The book follows Shay, an overachieving witch at a prestigious magical magnet school in South Florida, who has to decide between getting the scholarship for magical university that she desperately needs or exposing the predatory drama teacher who controls the scholarship.
Hi, my name's Anne Salin. I wrote the teen fantasy Rebel Skies. It's set in a fantasy version of early modern Japan, where a girl named Clara lives aboard a floating sky city, floating restaurant. And then one day when her restaurant is attacked by a paper dragon, her friend is hurt. And so she has to go on this big quest to the Sky Cities to save him.
Hi, I'm Senya. I'm the author of The Darkening. That's the UK version. And it's a story about a city trapped in the eye of a cursed storm and a girl who's already lost her mother to it and now is going to tear down the kingdom to avoid losing any more of her family.
Hiya, I'm Kate Dillon, and I'm the author of Mindwalker, which is a YA sci-fi set in a neon dystopia about a girl with a computer in her head who can take over other people's minds.
Perfect. I also wanted to remind people that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat and I will hopefully remember to scroll up and find them again later. But we're going to start off with some of my questions first. And the first question that I have is kind of in general about world building. I think that both sci-fi and fantasy have a lot of world to build. And so I wanted to know, what was the first image of your world that came to you and how did it evolve through the drafting process?
I'll go first. Yeah. So the very first image that I had was of this really jagged island surrounded by like a terrible sea, and there were like sea monsters in it. And I was immediately intrigued because I remember I remember scribbling water horses in my planner, and that was the only year I ever had a planner, by the way. I'm not a planning person. But see, once I knew that I wanted an island, I wanted like these terrible, this cosmically, naturally terrible things going on. The rest of it came pretty naturally because the people became isolated because of the sea, and the violence that came out of man versus nature theme, it kind of built it up very organically after that. So that first image was really important.
Yeah, for me, so I think I outlined the book like in entirety before I really had a single image of what the world was going to be like. I think I was very like practically like, here's what happens, and then I was like, now I need to come up with a vibe. And so I think the first image I had ended up being on the first page of the book, basically, because I had this idea of like magic as threads. And something that was in everything that people could manipulate to change the world around them. And I actually kept that throughout the drafting process, but I expanded the stuff that was possible to do with magic in the world. And yeah, from jump, I was really attached to the magic system in How to Succeed in Witchcraft being a really practical one, where there was some real internal logic about like, if you do X, then like Y happens. So I think that I wanted to have a really concrete image of something that you like could manipulate to make magical things happen. So I think that was where I started with it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure which came first. I think it might have been the paper magic that came first. So if anyone's ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender and they've seen like water bending or fire bending, it's basically like that, but with paper. So the paper magic was probably one of maybe the first thing that came up in the world. And then secondary was the origami beasts, which people who can use paper magic can sort of use as magical familiars. And so I think there's something really cool about the idea of paper being a weapon, because it's normally such a fragile thing and it's, you know, so easily destroyed. So turning that into something that's fearsome and something that's really scary was something that I wanted to use as a springboard for the world.
So for me, the first idea was this image of a kingdom surrounded by this dark storm. And like I saw it from above and it looked kind of like an eye, where the kingdom was the iris. And that stuck with me. But like Ashlyn was saying, that from there I started to get practical, because then I was like, okay, so if the storm cuts off, like how do the physics work? Like if the sun goes around it, then that means there's going to be a rim that never sees sunlight. And then what grows there? So then I came up with this, like, moss would grow there, and people there would have to figure out how to use it, and they would figure out what they could still basically grow to eat without sunlight, basically. And then, but like psychologically, you know, like Tanya was talking about, what are the themes that come from that first image? For me, it was that yearning, like seeing that there's a place that still gets to be in the sun, and all the people, and like my heroine is from the very outer ring that gets no sunlight, and the yearning that she would feel to be in the sun. That became kind of like a thing I wanted to earn in the writing of the book.
So those are all really good answers. So I'm just going to throw a grenade into the room and say I'm the worst world builder you have ever met. My first image was literally the computer in the MC's brain, and then I defaulted basically to the most basic dystopian sci-fi setting you could ever think about. Because for me, a story starts with a character and the plot, and I really work on those things first. And all the world building comes later. So if you ever read my first drafts, they'll probably read like baby's first novel, because everything is so cookie cutter. And so it was really in the second draft that I was like, okay, I've got this big tech thing. Like it was sci-fi. I tried to get away from it because of how tricky a genre YA sci-fi is, but really my MC's got a computer in her brain. There's really no escaping the fact that that's sci-fi. So I was just like, okay, well, dystopian is still a dirty word in YA publishing because, you know, publishing. And so how do I make this world more interesting than this cookie cutter thing? And that's when the neons came in. And I had all these like little ideas on the page that I just never elaborated on. Like I had hollow parks, but they were mentioned in passing once. And I was like, excellent, job done. People would just understand this. And then it was just like, actually, wouldn't it be cool if people were able to see that? Because actually, those are really fun things. And that the world and the imagery of the world really kind of escalated from there like that. So yeah, the first image was very boring, and I spent some time making it better.
I mean, you did make it better. I love Mindwalker. So
Thank you.
That's a good segue as well. Normally, I ask about the drafting process, but I thought today I would mix it up and I would talk about your revision slash editing process, because I wanted to know if your approach to revisions change as you like continue to gain more experience writing in general.
my revision process before was just so it was so small, I think. Like, I knew that, there were big changes that you're supposed to do in revisions, but I was always like, I was afraid of breaking the story up. I was, I would, it was such a tame process. I would add scenes, I would delete scenes, sometimes I would combine characters, but I was just like, if I've written a story once, that's it. That's what it's going to be. I'm just going to tweak it here. I'm just going to do this here. So, like, when I got into Pitch Wars, my mentor, author Rebecca Schaefer, she really pushed me to, she helped me break the story. She told me that we need to do it in a different way. We need, like, I have a good idea, but what I was doing was not a mess, but it was just not original. Like, I had taken the most unique idea about my book, like the Mary Stags and the ocean, and I had put them at the back of the thing rather than, it was just your standard rebellion, standard, all that stuff that's already been done. And she really helped me with that. So I mean, every book has a different process. I'm sure this is not the exact revision process I'm going to use before again, but I have learned to like separate my feelings from my revision process, and that's been really helpful.
Yeah, good question. Kate, I'm right there with you with the no world building in the first draft. I really wrote the first draft of this book and I looked at it and then I went, wow, I wrote a YA contemporary fantasy with no fantasy elements. Anyways, I was like, I said she's a witch like 6 times and then that was it. It's a book. So I feel like that was this book. I was like, I really have to like editing actually has to happen. I think that yes, my process has changed, but I think my process has changed just because like now I have people helping me whose job it is to help me. Which I want to say, like, nothing made me happier than when I had an editor, like when I got an editor and I was like, wow, now they can tell me all the things that are bad about my book instead of me like sending things to my friend and then being like, that was good. And being like, please tell me what's bad about it. So I think that's maybe the biggest change. I usually sort of get notes from my editor or writing group, and then I spend a few days feeling like my work is like abysmally terrible and totally unfixable. And I can't really work until I've gotten over that hump. And then I realize actually it's fine. And all of these things are things I can fix. And then I spend a while thinking about all of the stuff I need to, that they've identified that are like big things that and how I want to fix them. And I try and like come up with some concrete things to do to change those things. And then I make a big list of all the changes I'm going to make, and I start working my way through the list. And usually I start with the easy stuff, so I feel like I did something. If it's like, and by that I mean like I want to change this character's name, and I like Control F my way through the manuscript, and I'm like, I did something today. And then I start being like, dang, they told me that I really need to come up with a history for this world, and that's probably going to take me like weeks. So, I start small and then I move on to the bigger things after that. Yeah, I think that maybe the other thing that's changed is that I've accepted that the existential crisis I have every time I get notes is like a normal thing, and that's just going to happen. And I have to like take the time to wait until I feel better to start working again. Because I think earlier on in my like process as a writer, I used to be like, well, I have to start like editing right away. Like forget like how I feel. That doesn't matter. But actually, I really can't do that.
Yeah, I think my editing process has been me versus my word count is just the story of my entire editorial existence, because it's there's an age range to the book, and so my editors say, oh well, you can't have it be 100k long. What child is going to read a 100k book? So the editing is me trying to take things out or being told to take things out. And then because things have been taken out, there's like a hole in the middle that I need to cement. And so I feel a bit like someone who's been knitting a sweater very, very meticulously. And then someone says, oh, actually, that sweater needs to be 10K shorter. So unpick everything. And then once you've done unpicking that threads, you knit it all back in, but with 10K less. And that is the story of my editing process. And the reason why I will one day, become a villain. That will be my villain origin story. But yeah, I realize I also haven't given any answers about how to get around it, because I'm still working on how to sort of navigate that. Sometimes it's quite doable when they say, oh, well, take out that chapter. And then sometimes it's awful when they say, oh, take out that character and now write the whole story without that character. But yeah, that's my woes.
For me, I think I started out having, the opposite of Tanvi's problem, which was I would say, okay, I've written a book and I hate it, so I'm going to start over from page 1 and do it right this time. And I would save nothing. I would just be like, those ideas were bad, so I'm going to have a better one, like a better set of 100 ideas this time around. And I would do that like 3 times. And it would get better, but it would also change dramatically. Like the draft 1 book could have been a great book if I had sat down and edited it rather than saying like, to the bin with you. So I think for me, learning to love what I have written, to commit to it, to see it through, rather than saying, let me change everything about you. That's been a big learning lesson. And yeah, I agree. Having an editor is great. The one thing I haven't figured out is, like, I have thick skin. I can deal with critique of all sorts. I love it. I'm like, this is great. It's going to help me make the book better. But if an edit letter has more nice things than critiques, then I'm like, oh no, it's so awful. They can't tell me the truth. And that's why I get tripped up. I don't know if that's just a me thing or it's everybody, but that's the thing I'm learning to deal with. And so far I haven't found a way. I think the best thing about revising is that it kind of feels like the hard work's done, and now I just get to make the stuff I like better. And I think it's like trim the stuff you don't like and keep the stuff you do. And there's probably better ways to go about it, but that's what's been working for me.
So something interesting that I think people might not know is it's really interesting because Anne and I both play predominantly in the UK market, and we have slightly bigger splits between teen fiction and upper YA than I think is normal in the States. So whereas Anne's told not to go anywhere near 100K, my last edit letter came, I handed it in at 80K, and it came with a whole topic that said length. We should add some. And basically my guidelines are we'd like it to get to 90. Anything up to 110K is actually fine and preferable to the 80K that you've handed in. So it's really interesting how it kind of plays depending on where in the category you sit. But in terms of my actual editing process, what I've had to learn from book to book, and actually Mindwalker, as much as it's my English language debut, I actually have 2 books very randomly out in Germany. So I have actually been through the revision process before with a couple of books. This Mindwalker was book number 3 with an editor. And something I had to learn to do is edit faster. Because I wasn't just meticulous when I started. I was like, meticulous is here. And then I fell off a cliff somewhere so far off screen you can't even see it anymore. And it would take months. Like every sentence had to be done. It had to be done in order. Everything had to be perfect before I could move on. And you just don't get that kind of time in trade publishing. Like they're like, you have 2 or 3 months to hand in the next draft. So I've really had to learn to, I call it blocking out the changes, which is I just really roughly sort of block out the new scenes, and it's awful. And if I read it back, I have to do it kind of like this because I'm like, the words are so awful. But then once I've got the shape of it, then it's much easier to go back and clean up the language. And then I don't have to do things 3 or 4 times, which is what was happening with, my first and my second book. It would be like I would spend all this time cleaning up a scene and making it perfect. And then 3 scenes later, I'd figure out that actually that scene had to go altogether. And that was a huge waste of time. So I'm trying to get a little bit better at managing my time at the moment. It is going better. I am getting better at it, but there is always room for improvement.
Yeah, I love this question because editing editing, like anything of writing or of anything, like is the bane of my existence. And so this question just made me feel a little bit better about myself, as someone with like the thinnest skin possible. I just wanted to also remind people that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I had a few questions which kind of like pair books together. I wanted to start with The Darkening and Monsters Born and Made, because I think they both deal with this concept of perception. And I mean, they're also difficult choices, but like the intersection between perception and difficult choices. So I wanted to know, what does that intersection mean to your main characters? And in terms of difficult choices, what was the most difficult choice while drafting your book?
I think for Coral in Monsters Born and Made, societal expectations and perceptions, it's all of that has been a thing of the past. Like, she's seen that people will not help them out, like help her family out of some misplaced sense of inferiority towards their family. And she's not okay with it, but she endures it. And it's like she's also not privy to the rebels side of the story. She's not privy to other people's motives and makes assumptions based on what her life experience has been so far. So it's why she clashes with her brother and her best friend. Like, all of that it definitely plays into the whole story. And for me, the most difficult part of this was, letting the story unfold only via one point of view, like Coral's very limited first person point of view. And sure, I could have used others. I have had readers who are interested in, wanting to know the rebel side of the thing, and the other charioteer Dorian's point of view. They want to know what the landers are up to. They want to know all these things. But see, that's the point of the story, that we have this. My objective with the story was, I am going to solely tell Coral's story and what she experiences, because it's a risky choice for sure. And I know there are readers who would have liked to know more, but at the end of the day, that's not the story. It's Coral and her very specific point of view, where she is neither a lander, neither properly a renter. And it's a very deliberate choice to expand on the theme of perception using Coral. So yeah, that's what I tried to do. I know it makes people upset. I know it's a risky choice. I know that. But see, that's the theme that I wanted to explore. That's what the story is about.
Yeah, so for The Darkening, Vesper, the main character, her parents were revolutionaries, and they led a rebellion that failed very dramatically. But she's always grown up idolizing her mother and her father and their role in this, and for being people who wanted to change things for the better, because except for them, no one was trying to change anything. And Vesper, and there's a prince character, and all these characters have to grapple with the choices their parents and their ancestors made before them. And a lot of them kind of end up having different understandings of those choices as the story progresses, because their perception changes of, everyone was trying to do the right thing, but they did so with this limited amount of information, and they didn't know this. And like, how can all these people try and do the right thing lead to such terrible outcomes? So that was like neither the prince nor Vesper end up being exactly what they each see each other as. And that feeling of being able to open your eyes to someone else and to understand the point of view, even if it's very, very different to yours and in many ways the opposite to everything people you love fought for. That's kind of something I wanted to look at and capture and do with this book.
And then in Rebel Skies and Mindwalker, there are some serious plot twists and mysteries and secrets and all sorts of like secret stuff. So I wanted to know, how much as an author do you know about a story and any of these twists beforehand? And then how do you balance the pacing or the reveals of those kinds of mysteries and secrets?
For me, and when I was doing Rebel Skies, I'm definitely more of a plotter than a pantser. So I had each chapter already laid down before I started writing it. So I had a chapter by chapter summary of what happens in this chapter and what happens in that chapter, and so forth. So none of the twists were particularly twisty for me when it came to writing it. It was just, I just follow what I've written in this summary here. As for pacing, yeah, I think that is a difficult thing to sort of get your head around when you're starting. I think that's something that you kind of feel it as you're writing, and then especially when you get to the editing stage and you're reading back things, that's really when you get to fine tune the pacing. Because if I'm writing a chapter, sometimes a chapter can take days because I'm very, very slow, and so it feels like the chapter is really slow. But when I go back to reading it, it's actually not that slow. So it's definitely something that comes out in the editing.
So here's a thing about me. I am chaos all the way down, like all the way down. The first 5 chapters of a book is like, you ever play that game where somebody writes a sentence and you pass it on to the next person and they kind of add to it and you never know what's going to come up? That's me in the first 5 chapters. And, my brain is just doing things and I'm like, all right, sure, we're doing this now. Great. And it's only after I've got a few chapters in the bag that I actually get a sense for what the story actually is. So with Mindwalker, it took a little while, but once I hit the character who ultimately turns out to be the villain, it's sort of all, I was just like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing with, this person. And from there it kind of built, but I really didn't know how the twist was going to play out until I really got there. In fact, I have an old synopsis somewhere that I'm pretty sure ends with a bunch of zombies in this book, which doesn't make any sense if you've read the book or the synopsis or anything about this book. It doesn't make sense at all. But like when I got to it, I was just like, yeah, we're not doing that. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah, total chaos. I only really know very certain things as I'm writing, and then I sort of work towards them, and sometimes they change and sometimes they stay the same. It's really kind of hard to tell, but somehow it all ends up coming together in the end, and I live in fear that one day that'll just stop working, but so far it's been okay. And as for pacing, my go-to trick is to blow something up. Literally, if I'm like, oh, you've been talking for 3 pages, we should blow something up. Something needs to be on fire. Someone needs to be on a run. Quick, jump out of a window, which might explain why my last edit letter also said, hey, maybe they should talk at some points in between the explosions, to which I responded with, what if I set it somewhere else on fire? Needless to say, that was met with a no, please, no more fires. So for me, it's actually the opposite things. My books tend to be breakneck pace, and in editing, I have to actually slow them down so that you care about the characters as the world quite literally explodes around them all the time. But I remember one of the best tips that I ever got from my editor on actually the book series I have in Germany is that if you're worried about pace, put a clock on it. like literally a ticking clock is going to help you move things along much faster. It's like a really easy trick. So, you know, with Mindwalker, what I did was I built a literal bomb clock into my main character's head. Easy.
Yeah, I feel like it'll be like next time, where is the fire extinguisher? Like, build in a fire extinguisher into your book.
Whole fire suppression systems are required. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in How to Succeed in Witchcraft, it's one of my like favorite fantasy contemporary worlds, just because I also feel like it's one of the only worlds in this entire panel where like I would probably live at least halfway through. Like there just aren't that many people who are randomly getting attacked or set on fire or, you know, like any of that kind of stuff. So I wanted to know, what are some of your favorite like contemporary fantasy reads or inspirations? And also, what was the hardest or easiest part of your like magic world / magic system to create?
Yeah, well, I have too many books that I want to talk about, so I'm going to try and be controlled. I really like A Dark and Hollow Star by Ashley Shuttleworth, Legendborn, Cemetery Boys. These are very popular books. The Scapegracers by Hannah Abigail Clark. I really like that. And then also Ninth House. I was thinking about that recently, by Leigh Bardugo. That was really good. The theme is I like queer contemporary fantasy, and I like people with women fighting the system, kind of, and usually like in a realistic setting. I like that. Yeah. So I think, what was the hardest? I want to say like almost all of it was hard in terms of crafting the magical world. But the stuff that paid off the most, I got notes on the world in every edit letter that I got, and every time anyone read this book until the end. So now when people are like, if anybody says that the world is good, I feel like throwing myself a parade, because I really edited it every time. I think there was a point where I had tried to deal with the world and like to make it very contemporary, I think, which is why the book ended up with no magic in it, by setting it in a very familiar setting to me. It's set in South Florida, which is where I grew up. And like making the problems I thought was interesting in the book was that it has a very mundane problem. And I don't mean mundane like boring. I mean mundane like it's very recognizably a problem from our world. But then there's also a large way that I used magic in the first drafts of this was to make a very like a problem that seems like huge and horrible in our world today to like give a sense of like agency, but also like fun to the world, to make it be something that isn't just so horrible to try and contemplate and like look at when you're reading the book. But then that meant that there was magic was just like sort of the frills, like the icing on the cake that had no purpose in the book. So then it was hard to look at it and be like, all right, well, I got a long list of questions in one of my first big edit letters that was like, because also the book is largely about like axes of oppression and how those play into things. That it was like, how does this work in a world that's our world but not our world, where magic exists? So then I had to go back and write a history. So that was both like the hardest and the easiest part, because it was very hard. Like I wrote a big document, and then I had to go back and overhaul the book and put all of this history that I had like written in, to like retcon it into the book. But also it was very satisfying once I like had come up with all of it and was excited to and like felt like it really worked and was interesting to sort of throw it into the book. And then I felt good when I got an edit letter that was like, some of this should go. Why have you inserted this like random fact here? And I'm like, I made it up so someone needed to know about it. Yeah. So I think that was simultaneously the hardest and easiest part, was like coming up with cool stuff that I was excited about was the easy part, but then being like, oh, and now I have to like work it into this book that didn't originally have that.
Yeah, and I never remember what the name of this like literary thing is, but you know, at the beginning of chapters when they have like stuff.
I didn't know what it was called either until my editor sent me an email being like, the epigraphs, and I was like, and I had to Google it because I was like, the what? And then I was like, oh, the thing I've done in every chapter. So it's called an epigraph, apparently.
Yeah, I really loved that touch as well. It's in one of my earlier like notes from when I was reading the books because I think it gives it like it's almost like a footnote in the sense that it has like information that is useful, but is not necessarily like if you didn't read it, you would still understand what the book is about. But it's information that kind of gives it more depth of color, I feel like, or like more depth of field or whatever it's called.
I think that was the stuff I was the most proud about, where all the stuff that I managed to put in there that I hoped would give color to the world. And I know some people, like, I think as a reader, I kind of end up skimming those and being like, okay, whatever. But I was like, if anyone reads them, I promise I put a lot of work into them. They're great.
We have a lot of questions, so I'm gonna go over to some of the questions that we have. I like this question a lot, and it's for everybody. It says, "What's one book that helped build your book?" And also, oh wait, that's two parts. Okay, we'll just start with the first one, which is, "What's one book that helped build your book?"
I mean, if anyone has read an arc of Monsters Born and Made, they know that this is the Hunger Games meets the Scorpio races. And yeah, I think the Hunger Games is super, super foundational to my writing, to me finding my voice, because I think before the Hunger Games, I hadn't really read a teenage dystopia. Like, yeah, there were 1984, there was all these things, but I hadn't read, I mean, there might have been, maybe I haven't found them. There was The Giver, yeah, but like Giver was like really short and it like really dated. But yeah, so the Hunger Games was definitely, I think I'm gonna credit the Hunger Games for it, definitely.
We seem to have lost one, so I'll jump in real quick. This is really hard. I'm gonna say This Mortal Coil by Emily Suvada. And the reason I say that is because I think it was the first really hard sci-fi YA that I had personally come across. Now, Mindwalker isn't hard sci-fi at all. It's actually probably the opposite end to This Mortal Coil. But it was like, as I was starting to think about writing Mindwalker, something that I heard a lot was there is really no market for YA sci-fi. That the audience doesn't like hard sci-fi. Sci-fi doesn't work. Like, God, ad nauseum. Like, imagine that for 4 years straight, basically. But then, I was starting to play around with the first few chapters, and I did pick up This Mortal Coil. And not only was it like kind of dystopian and sci-fi, it was hard sci-fi. Like, you can tell Emily loves science in a way that I really don't know that much about science, to be honest. But like, her love for science came out on the page, and she somehow made it really fun and really accessible. And I was just like, if she can do this, and sell this and get this out in the way that she did, which was incredible, I was just like, I could probably do something with my made for TV sci-fi, which is, future science as opposed to real science, and kind of like sci-fi light, which is kind of neon vibes, but, very Marvel-esque science as opposed to real science. So I feel like I was so glad that I picked up that book and that a publisher put out that book. And yeah, it's a really great book. It's a really great trilogy, actually, for anyone who does enjoy both sci-fi, but also slightly harder sci-fi.
Just in case we need a refresher on the question, it was, "What's one book that has helped build your book or inspire your book?" I think.
So Ashley, I think we lost you, but I think you're next in line.
Okay, awesome. What a good question. I feel like Cemetery Boys, probably, by Aiden Thomas. I am such a big fan. I was very excited when they blurred my book. I was like, I've really made it. And I think there's just something really incredible to me about how that book blends both like contemporary like problems, and like the character having a problem that is like the main character having a problem that is very rooted in like the real world and the world that we have, and also like a very specific sense of place, that character like has a connection. The main character has a connection to where they're from, and also like I just like a world that's both like very fun and has characters that are like really out there being the main character of their story. And I just love seeing like queer characters of color being the main character like that, and really being able to sort of go and take it all on and just have like a big magical story. So I think that's it for me.
I'm going to say something very obscure. And say The 12 Kingdoms by Fuyumi Ono. And I say this because not only is the world building fantastic in that book, but it's one of the very first books that had sort of Asian mythos and Asian belief sort of buried into its world building and fundamental to its world building. So the 12 Kingdoms is very much based on sort of Buddhism and Chinese mythology, and Rebel Skies is very much a book which is based in sort of the Asian mysticism of papercraft, and also like Shinto belief as well. And that is embedded so deeply in the world building that you can't really separate them without breaking it. So yeah, the 12 Kingdoms was really, really formative, especially when I was growing up, because when I was young, fantasy was always, faux Western European. And this was the very first time I'd encountered a really epic fantasy that was also, based in East Asia. Sorry. So that was really formative for me.
I feel like these are great answers. And for me, when I was 14, I read this book called Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. And I think it's like the first or second page, the main character has like kind of like a guy that lives in his head called A Boy Called Crow. And that character says, you're embarking on a journey and you're going to end up facing a storm. And it was a sandstorm, but the idea of the storm is that it's going to chase you forever. And there's no way you can escape it unless you turn around and walk right through it. And like, of course, it was a metaphor, but I was like, oh, how cool would it be if it wasn't a metaphor? And I think that stuck with me for like years and years. And I was like, okay, if I write it, I'll get it out of my head. But yeah, that's a great book. So that was the one that helped me.
I just wanted to say that I'm going to drop the giveaway link in the chat. Hopefully it will be self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, you can find me on the internet. The second part of the question from before was, if your main character wrote a letter to you, the author, what would that letter say?
Oh my God. I think because I share a lot of intersectional identities with Coral. So I think, and I'm not projecting at all, but I think she would like an older sister. I think it would help her because, like, yeah, I think we can form a bond like that. That's so strange. Like, I'm just now thinking about it. That is such a cool idea. I should have given her an elder sister. But yeah, I think she would have probably asked me about life in general, because living in this is the phrase that I always use, in the margin of marginalization. I think for Coral to have another woman slash gender fluid person, or not a cis het man, exist in the world, I think it would mean a lot to her. So yeah.
Yeah, mine is going to be far more crass than that because I'm pretty sure Syl would tell me to shove my head somewhere anatomically impossible, and then fill the rest of the page with other curse words because I am not nice to my characters, and my characters are not that nice either. So I don't think I should expect anything nice back, to be honest. So yeah, lots of cursing, I assume, because I don't think they'd be happy about the world I created or the situations that I put them in. And I think they would get the sense that I enjoyed the drama a little bit too much at their expense.
Yeah, I think that to some extent, Shay is really a very different, but like a love letter to what I was like when I was in high school. So I think that maybe she would have questions about how it turned out, you know, like how things went, and like I don't know, uh, like what it because she's a character who's like really focused on getting into college, and like getting into the college of her dreams, of like what it was like to like graduate high school and like go on to sort of go to college and like go to the college I wanted to go to and what that was like. So I think that maybe that's kind of what she would actually end up asking me. And also maybe why I put her through such horrible things in the book.
Yeah, I think I'm with Kate's main character as well, in that my main character, Karara, she probably would swear a lot less than Syl, but I think her letter to me would just be the word "really?" question mark, and that's it. Um, because there's a lot of fantastical things in Rebel Skies, so theoretically she could have had a very, very nice time. There are sky wells, and then there's huge cities in the skies that she can explore. But instead, the sky wells attack her, and the cities in the sky kind of get blown up ish. So she could have had a nice time, but she didn't.
Well, if she knows me as the author of all her problems, then that's different than if she just knows me as another person. And I think if Vesper knew me as the author, she would, you know, she's pretty smart. She would probably try to convince me, like do her best to maybe manipulate me a tiny bit in the kindest way to give her a better life and to stop doing what I've been doing. But yeah, I think we'd get along. I hope.
An earlier question as well was, what was the smallest detail in your world that you are proud of?
Oh my god. I why am I the first person to go here? I think one of the things that I really liked was the use of the word starfishes as light, as an organism that people use for light. I think that just came out of nowhere to me, but I just loved it. Like, they're not real starfishes. Okay, they're not like, the ones we have here. They're like kind of glowworms, but like from the ocean. So that's the kind of thing it is, and they give off light, and I love that idea. Just like, these little starfish kind of a thing. Starfish. I shouldn't have used that word. That's how I'm so bad at world building anyway. But yeah, I really like that. And I think that's the thing. I just use these little things to just kind of situate themselves in this world, and I really like that. I have no answer, as you can probably see.
Tanvi, you would get along really well with my German fish books, which, by the way, is not their name, but it's what I call them. Yeah, if you like light starfish.
Yeah, I do. I do.
But yeah, you'd get along really well with them. Whereas I was born for this question because I love puns. Like, my whole book would be puns if I wasn't made to cut like 95% of them, and then the other 5% for just plain not being funny. But there's one that survived every draft of Mindwalker, and I'm actually going to read it out because I love it that much. And it goes, we make our way to the Syntax building in together, mostly silent, our fingers intertwined, the boy in the expensive suit and the junker, a regular Hallmark movie special. And I was so proud of myself for that. Like, literally, it took 3 days to come down off the high that pun gave me. And like every so often, I still just get a DM from a reader going, Hallmark, exclamation mark, seriously. And I'm just like, yep, that's it. I'm done.
Okay. I feel like there's a lot of things that I really think are great and funny and hilarious that I don't think anybody else will think are great and funny and hilarious. And that's okay. But they're all kind of in the epigraphs, actually. They're all in the stuff before, like at the beginnings of the chapters. I had a part where I referenced, I have a bit where it's like a potion maker's like blog, who's like, oh, I like, I mean, you know, where you like follow someone who like is basically a makeup or beauty guru, but it's like instead in this world, it's like this girl making potions. And it's her talking about making her own potions and like about how like you shouldn't do it if it's too hard, because like if people do it and then sometimes they like set their own hair on fire by accident. And I found this one very funny. And then she's like, oh, we're going to make one that is very similar to this like brand that exists. That's Madam C.J. Walker's Beauty, which is a reference to a historic Black hair care person who was, I think, wow, I'm not going to be able to quote this correctly, and I should, considering that I brought it up. But she is like a famous Black entrepreneur who made a lot of money historically. I think in like not going to be able to say the time, but at least 100 to 200 years ago. That's it.
So I actually have two things, which one which is still in the book and one that got cut. Thank you very much. The one that is still in the book is that the sky ship that the main character finds herself on is called the Orihime, which is the Weaver Star, or Vega as it's known in English. And there's a myth around this star that the Weaver Star and the Cowherd Star were lovers, and they're separated by the Milky Way, and they can only meet once every year on the 7th day of the 7th month. And so the Orihime is the Weaver Star, and the Hikoboshi is the Cowherd Star. And in one of the chapters, very, very briefly, they reference the Hikoboshi meeting with Orihime at once. And so that was my very nice tiny little nod. The other thing, though, which I'm so upset about, is that I had a scene where some characters are talking about cheese and how there's only one place in the entire empire where you can get cheese. And as I was writing this scene, I thought, wait a minute, in early modern Japan, did they actually have cheese at that point? Did they start dairy farming? And so I spent like 7 hours researching where you can find dairy farms and historic dairy farms in Japan, and at what point did dairy farming become normal in early modern Japan. And then when the Great Purge happened against my word count, it was cut. So that was 7 hours of my life wasted for cheese. And yeah, so that's my two things.
I love that story. But one of the things I try to do in my books is kind of like always please my inner 11-year-old who really just wants things to be awesome all the time. And from the storm that encircles the city, there are beasts made out of like churning black storm cloud that come out, and which sounds really cool. But then I was like I really want to visualize this, and I really want my inner 11-year-old to be really happy with this. So one of the ideas I had was to, like, the beasts come out in a shape like as like a lion or like a chimera creature. They attack and then they wisp back, like dissipating back into the storm to be reborn another day. And that visual, and the visual of being able to trap a storm beast and it constantly changing its shape, were some of the things where it's like, oh, this is the book that makes me happy on all the levels that matter to me.
Okay, I want to ask, if it's okay, one very quick lightning, whatever it's called, lightning fire question. I know we're over time, but I still wanted to ask it anyway. I wanted to know, what are some other 2022 debuts that you've loved, or 2023 debuts that you want to shout out? Mostly because what kind of panel would it be if we didn't give more books for your TBR?
Okay, for 2022, I am in love with Gina Chen's Violet Made of Thorns. And I really like, I love that book. I really love that book. But also Only a Monster by Vanessa Len. Like, my inner 15-year-old who was, reading all these early YA books. I am so happy she wrote that book. And I also really loved Cold the Night Festivals by Meg Long. It's super cool. It's I love it. And for 2023, I'm really looking forward to Midnight Strikes by Zeba Shehnaz. Her cover is amazing. I love it. And Imperial by Megan Scott. It's also another UK YA. I don't know if you've heard about it. You should. And there is also this book, Shadow Sister by Lily Mead. And I'm really looking forward to all these books.
So I'm going to build on that, because you stole Cold the Night, Fast the Wolves, which I think is really rude considering that one's a sci-fi. But so Meg's got a companion novel coming out in 2023, which I bullied an early manuscript of, and it's absolutely phenomenal, and you all should check it out. There's also another, so Claire Wynn, City of Shattered Light was an awesome YA, that was 2021. Oh God, what is time? But it was awesome nonetheless, and you should really check it out because it's one of the very, very few YA cyberpunks, and she's also got a sequel coming out in 2023. Was it 20? I don't know how time works anymore. And also, Jenna Voris has a Bonnie and Clyde in Space coming out in 2023 that I'm really looking forward to, called Made of Stars. Haven't bullied my way into that one yet, but I'm working on it.
Awesome. My first thought is Jazz Hammonds' We Deserve Monuments. I'm so excited for this book to finally come out at the end of this year. And then The Witchery, another witchy book set in Florida. Lily Lanoff's One for All. Can't do recommendations without mentioning that. Women with Swords, a historical sort of fantasy. So exciting. And then I'm also going to make one totally left field, other genre recommendation that's not YA. I also just really love adult romance. I'm actually really obsessed with adult romance books. So this is me coming through for love, hate, and clickbait, because I read it this year and it was so funny that I went around quoting it to everybody that I encountered for like 3 days, which was annoying for them and so fun for me. Yeah.
Well, I think everyone's books here goes without saying, right? So, my recommendations for 2022 was The Girl of No Soul came out, which is really nice, like atmospheric YA. It harkens back to like old school YA, and it's like coming home. It's got a really nice feeling to it. The second one I have ready is Mia and the Lightcasters, which is more MG-ish than YA, but I still think it's a really good, really interesting world building there, and so I really recommend that as well.
So I had a list, but I think this is the problem with going last, is that they've all pretty much been said. Though I have started just yesterday A Magic Steeped in Poison, and I've been really enjoying that, which came out earlier this year. And the sequel is already out, which is kind of amazing. The timeline that Judy wrote both of those. But yeah, I think there's so many great books that you all have mentioned. Only Monster was great, and yeah, it's been kind of a great year.
I haven't even debuted, and Judy's like already a seasoned author with her duology completed.
Yeah, I was gonna like optimistically also contribute, but now I'm gonna say no. I don't have anything to contribute to this question. I can, yeah, I don't know. All of those are so fantastic, and I can't think of like literally any other ones now. But that, I mean, I probably have, but I can't think of any. So sorry about that. Um, I have put the giveaway link also earlier in the chat, and I will also put it in the description box below. Also, everyone's links to their book are also, I think, in the description box below. And I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for all the questions, which we didn't get a chance to. I'm very sorry. There were a few that were very fun looking, but also a few that I thought were going to be a little bit too hard, mostly because when it was asking about what everyone's character's victory pose was going to be, I personally could not act. And so I felt a little bit cruel giving that out as a question. But if anyone has any, like, if any of the authors have any spurs of inspiration afterwards where they want to like draw an optimistic stick figure about like your character's victory pose after something, feel free to do so. I just felt like it was kind of a spur of the moment cool thing to ask, so I didn't, but I really liked that question. I'll definitely put it in future panels. Thank you all to the authors for chatting as well. I had so many questions also that I selflessly did not ask, but I very much wanted to. So thank you all for the inspiration, and I guess thank you to myself for prioritizing everyone else's questions. But anyway, please pick up everyone's books as well. All the links below. And yeah, I hope everyone has a really great day, waking hours, rest of your waking hours. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys your TBR bump that we just did for everyone. Bye, everybody.